Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. We are so happy to be with you. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed, Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple, Congregation on Shemet. Joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, the Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you. Barry, a little under the weather here. It's not COVID. It's a little cold. Refuah Shlema, okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay, before we begin, just a word. Thank you, all the people that are watching and listening to us and writing into us. We are thrilled every time we get a little note. We get a little. It's so delightful to hear from everyone, and we know that we are making everybody's Parsha life better. We know that by the jewels of Torah that we have here, that we are enhancing your appreciation of the Parsha and Shabbat. And we know we've become an indispensable part of people's lives. Is that not true, Rabbi Kalmanovsky?
And all I can say is, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you, Camp Ramah. Thank you, Camp Ramah. Mitch Murnick, big shout out. Thank you for always putting us on the Kol Ramah. And one of these days, I think the Camp Ramah newsletter might put a link to us. We'll see. And many of you can help us by just sharing this, saying this is the greatest Parsha talk in the history of Parsha.
That used to be in Dutchess County.
We're now
once the Dutchess County's leading Torah podcast, now the world.
The world, in our own mind, at least. Parshat Hayyei Sarah. This is, you know what? We shouldn't say it's our favorite, one of our favorite. I like this Parsha a lot. I love this Parsha. Because it's got this great little novella, short story in it, and it's really a transitional Parsha. Really, we get the sense, certainly by the end of the Parsha, with the genealogies that are going on and what happens at the end of Abraham's life. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This Parsha begins with the death of Sarah Imenu. She passes away. And of course, the rabbis connect the Akedah to the death of Sarah, which is a bit of a stretch, in my opinion, right? That would make Isaac 37 years old at the Akedah. It's a little much. She's 127 years old when she dies. She dies in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. So this presents us with the first problem, which is Avram is in Beersheba. She's in Hebron. Discuss.
Well, the sort of natural reading, which you're free to when you look granularly and see that she's 127. He was 90 when he was born. Then obviously he'd be 137. That's not very smooth or logical. But the narrative oomph of this is that it goes immediately from the Torah goes immediately from the death, the near-death experience, or perhaps the death and resurrection experience of Isaac, and then it says immediately she died. So the midrash is that when she hears about it, Satan comes to tell her, "Do you know what your crazy old husband has just done?" And she has a heart attack and basically dies out of shock and grief. And so the two parshiot are connected. Now, I was pointing out before we talked last week, we talked about the multiple readings, the quote unquote happier ending. I guess they're both happy endings of the Akedah, being that God or the angel saves Isaac at the last minute, no blood is shed, versus the one that is that Isaac is perhaps the kind of between the lines or esoteric reading that Isaac is killed and resurrected. The Haftarah for last week, the story of the Shunammite woman, is a story about a woman, barren woman, waits for a long-awaited child. She prays for a child. Elisha, the prophet, says, using the exact same words as in Breshit, I will be back to you ke'et chaya, for a gestation period, and you're going to have a baby. And she has the baby, and she's very happy. And then the baby gets sick and dies, and Elisha resurrects the baby. And the woman is now, she's delirious, and she gets to hold her beloved child again. That's a very, very close match for the narrative of the Akedah into Sarah's death. Woman waits for child, long-awaited child, long-expected child. She prays, she gets her wish, and then the child is robbed from her. In the story of Elisha, it's kind of a more immediate happy ending. In the story of Sarah, if we map the two stories together, it's not such a fast happy ending.
I don't have a problem with that in the sense that it's these stories are playing with common motifs, and certainly death and resurrection is a motif that is picked up by another religion, I guess. But we can certainly
You
see.
mean Chabad?
Yeah, really. But the fact, death of the child, death of the young child, terror of that, sacrifice of the child, these are also important motifs.
Right,
and that's okay, I got it. Yeah.
What's interesting though, Elliot, is you spoke of the death of a young child, which undermines the smichut parshiot, because the smichut parshiot changes
Just
actually our
explain what you mean by
understanding.
smichut parshiot for a second.
When two passages come close together, they help us understand each other. It's because right after the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, Sarah dies, the rabbis made the connection that one event followed the other. But it also changes the way that the rabbis understood the Akedah. And I think that's an important point, because if Isaac is 37, he's really the hero, not Abraham.
Right.
Because
if she's 127, then he's 37.
So that's why
right,
I have difficulty accepting.
Better said than I did.
I have difficulty. Go ahead.
But I just wanted to add, so, it's struck me for a long time that we call it Akedat Yitzchak, but it really should be called Nisayon Abraham, the test of Abraham, which is the Torah's term.
All right. Well,
and it's only because the rabbis think that submission is better than destruction that they shift the emphasis to Isaac and take it off of Father Abraham.
No, I think, we're going to rehash last week. I think that the main moment of the story is when he binds him. That's the superfluous moment. Therefore, that's what the title calls your attention to, the binding of Isaac. That didn't have to happen. And I can't accept, at least in my imagination, it's very hard for me to see him as a 37-year-old man. Geez, it wasn't too long ago that we were all 37, eh? Okay, so
who remembers?
Look, no, in the story he's a boy. He's not had his bar mitzvah. He's what, 7, 8, 10, who knows? But he's certainly not 37. And the rabbis conveniently juxtapose the stories and make that midrash that she died upon hearing it, because what's the alternative? The alternative is that if he was 6 or 7, so he would have lived 30 more years before she died, and she would have lived 30 years knowing that her husband had traumatized him this way. And that, I think that the rabbis do this out of Rahmanis for Sarah. They don't want her to suffer. And it's a very charitable reading of the midrash. The rabbis saying they have
Elliot,
a lot of compassion for her. They don't want her to suffer, and she suffered enough.
So they don't want her to suffer, so they kill her off. Where's the chachma in that?
No, the chachma is they don't want her to live with the pain, that terrible pain of knowing that her husband nearly did this, and that's the midrash. And the pshat though makes a lot more sense. The pshat what makes sense upon reading it is that they're separated. They're separated. He's in Beersheba, she's in Hebron. Why? The reason is because she can't live with him, and I would add, he can't live with her.
No, this part I think is quite strong. Okay, that the pshat, and you could square this circle. It's midrash. It's in the category of davar acher. You can tell multiple stories, and they don't all have to coalesce so cleanly. You can say that the tremendous shock and awe, and that's why she died, and the smichut parshiot, the juxtaposition, does have its own midrashic or narrative power. But I agree with you that the emotional literary power is that at the end of that Akedah story in 22, Abraham goes to Beersheba. Immediately, the very next thing we hear is that he has to lavo lispod l'sara v'liv kota. He has to come to her funeral, because why? He's living in Florida.
But I want to pick up on that.
And
So
Isaac and Abraham don't speak to each other again.
Yes.
Sarah and Abraham don't speak to each other again.
Yes.
And so you're left with the kind of gap in your heart at the end of that story.
Okay.
but I just want to pick up on one thing here though. So, we use the word lispod becomes hesped, the eulogy. So think for a moment, what would Abraham actually say about Sarah at her funeral?
So it's interesting. There is no funerary rite here. There's, what is he doing that is in any way recognizable? The only thing I think is that he buries
But he's
her.
crying.
He's crying. What does that even mean? Because he is so sober. In the next scene, he does a very rigorous negotiation. The guy has all his marbles. He hasn't lost a single
I
beat.
think that servant has his marbles.
Whose marbles? What I didn't hear. He negotiates like a Don with Ephron the Hittite. Okay. And he gets what he wants. And this is not a man who is really suffering terribly.
I think you have to explain that though. When you say that, because the modern commentators mention that 400 shekels is an extraordinary amount of money to pay for anything,
Right.
and he doesn't bat an eye. Right? Ephron says 400 shekels, and he doesn't negotiate.
Well, Ephron says you can have it for free because who needs 400 shekels?
Right.
And Abraham says, no, I have to own this myself. I have to pay
because he wants incontrovertible title to the land. And he wants it to be so clear beyond anybody's question that he will do it. And he does this in front of everybody. It's such a brilliantly narrated story. It has so many different. Yeah,
this is the second time in which we see the same basic motif of Abraham when he fights the 4 kings against the 5 kings, and the king of Sodom says, let me pay you for all of your tremendous effort. He says, I won't even take a shoestring from you.
Exactly.
So that you don't say, Sharti et Avram. Nobody says, why Abraham is so successful and wealthy? Well, the king of Sodom gave him a break, or Ephron HaChiti gave him a break. This is like kind of maybe a little bit of excessive, maybe a teeny bit of macho, like, I'm going to do this myself, and if I can't do it myself, I don't want you. You can keep you and your stupid help can go. Leave me alone.
No, and so he's in total control of his faculties. He's in total control of the situation. He gets exactly what he wants, and he establishes incontrovertible title to that little piece of land, which admittedly is it's a small piece of land, but it's his piece of land. Right?
It's a hole in the ground.
It's a cavern.
But it's worth thinking about. There's only one other person among the original families, the patriarchal families, that is actually buried where they died, and that's Rachel, because all the others are going to be brought back to.
I'll be brought back
to Machpelah.
Okay. Well,
this is super important.
Yes.
Super important, and the fact that Rachel is well, certainly compared to Leah, I mean, she's a less fruitful mother. She has fewer children, but she has really important children, Yosef and Binyamin. But she is kind of left outside, and that Kever Rachel, the Midrash will have the reason that she's buried on the road is so that as the children are led into exile, they have to walk past her kever, and she cries, and that's why people care about it so much today. As anybody who's been there now knows that it is literally, kever Rachel is literally tucked into a bend in the separation fence. Separation fence is built literally just around the grave of Rachel, but the grave of Machpelah, where we have Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob and Leah, and by Midrashic tradition, the Bible doesn't say this, also Adam and Eve. They're buried in this cave. This is super important. The 400 shekel kesef, the 400 silver pieces, just for point of comparison, David buys from Ornan HaYevusi the threshing floor, which will become the Beit HaMikdash, for 50 shekels. So if you're reading the Bible as a kind of a unified, within a unified frame, one of the things that is being said, not that I'm saying that those two texts necessarily are speaking to each other, but if you read it within a unified frame, you could draw the conclusion that, the Beit HaMikdash is really important. The family and the ancestors are roughly 8 times more important, at least in Jewish
Absolutely.
value.
And you know what? I mean, we do, Judaism, I think, picks up from this. We revere our ancestral burial places. I think to a certain extent that is quite powerful.
I love what Barry asked. What does Abraham say in his hesped? I'm probably going to steal your question for Saturday morning. I hadn't thought about this because it's such a
Well,
complicated.
so you and I write eulogies. What would you put in his mouth?
I'll just make the parenthetical observation that I don't know if things have always changed. I think from my 21 years in the pulpit, it used to be the case that sometimes the children would speak and at a funeral, and almost never the spouse would speak.
Yeah.
Now the children speak almost every time.
Yes.
And the spouses also speak sometimes.
Well, I have the whole thing about this, which is it has to do with the changing relationship to the rabbinate. It has to do with narcissism. It has to do with lots and lots of things. For people who are watching this, and I certainly encourage people to eulogize their loved ones, but make sure you don't talk about yourself. That's just the short way of saying, make sure you focus on the loved ones. And so, it's hard not to read that verse, Lispod l'Sarah. So if in fact he is saying something about her, what would he be saying about her? And the most charitable thing would be, and here I'll offer this. Look, you put up with me. You put up with me for all this
He
time.
would say
I
that
uprooted you. I took you out of your, I took you on this journey, and it was not easy. And you, the greatest thing about you was that you went, and that's amazing.
I would add one other
I get
thing.
emotional just saying it now.
He would say with a rueful smile that she had a wonderful laugh.
Okay.
Oh, nicely done.
Nice.
Nicely done. That's just brilliant. Abraham, I think, as Elliot kind of alluded to, Abraham betrayed her in multiple ways. There's the wife sister aspect, and while the Bible's very clear that when the wife sister ruse happens the second time in the Philistines with Abimelech, God protects her. But I think it's pretty clear that God does not protect her from Pharaoh. So she suffers a kind of degradation in the first time. She does go with this guy traipsing from presumably a kind of Mesopotamian wealth to a Palestinian, frightening journey that's not so great. But let's also say, I mean, I think that there's Abraham betrays her, but Sarah also does one of the things that is like the most like appalling in the Genesis narratives is that in her jealousy about Yishmael, she's willing to send Hagar. I mean, she feels very competitive with Hagar the first time when Hagar just becomes pregnant, and Hagar gets a little haughty and Sarah abuses her. But okay, the angel sends Hagar back. They try again. She has the baby. She's lived with Yishmael for 13 years. He's her stepson. And then when she gets jealous on Isaac's behalf, she sends Hagar and Yishmael into the desert with the full expectation that they're going to die. So Sarah's got a tough edge on herself too. She's not.
So here I agree with you totally, but the positive frame I would put on this is that she understood something that, in retrospect, makes total sense, which is, she says, this boy can't inherit what my son is going to have. And by severing the parental relationship between Abraham and Ishmael, she sets aside the possibility of a sibling fight later on, and makes it abundantly clear that everything has to go through Isaac. And for that, I think, look, that's the people in a nutshell. She understands that the covenant has to go through him. Case, end of story.
Except for one thing. And that is, I mentioned before the show that the place, Be'er Lachai Roi, this well of is associated with Hagar in the earlier part of the Torah, and here it's associated with Yitzchak. So it would seem that one can make the argument that Hagar becomes the mother figure for Isaac.
Absolutely. There's still a residual affection, certainly between Isaac and Ishmael.
But it also may be a reflection on the way Isaac looks at Sarah.
And the way Isaac relates to Abraham. Okay. So
I mean, if you were, I love that, because we're just imagining here. I mean, the Bible's narrative, especially in Breshit, the Bible's narratives are as spare as can be. That's their literary power. They say a minimum, they tell you a minimum of detail and give you a maximum of space to fill in. But we're imagining right now that the young Isaac loved his big brother and had a happy home, and Sarah diminished it. And if you were a kid, and of course, but as a child, you're just always going to identify with your parents. But then you discover that your parent maybe has done something violent. Like, how do you deal with that? Maybe Isaac has to deal with, my mother tried to kill my half brother, and I'm bereft. Of course, at the end of this parasha, Abraham will also die, and after because we are also telling the story again. This is an imaginative story. It's not a detail in the Bible, that the children of Ishmael and the children of Yitzchak, the Jews and the Arabs, we want there to be a different kind of reconciliation. It just calls to us that at the end of the parasha, for all of the bad stuff that has gone down, Ishmael and Yitzchak come together to bury Abraham, which is just beautiful. Like, how do they do that? Remember that time my mom drove you into the desert? Let's not talk about that now.
You remember Sam Claxburn?
Sure.
So he had a lecture called Abraham on the altar, Isaac on the couch. That to do the analysis, or what's going on here. I mean, we can fast forward to the end of the parsha where he marries Rebecca, and it says he loved her, and it's at the end of chapter 24. At the end of chapter 24, it says as follows, the last verse: Vayikach vayivieha Yitzchak ohela Sarah imo. Isaac takes her into the tent of his mother. Vayikach et Rivka, he takes her. Vayehi vatihi lo liisha, she becomes his wife. Vayehaveha, he loves her. Vayinachem, he is comforted. Yitzchak acharei imo, after his mother. And there is the whole, that's the whole
right, and that will be picked up later in the phrase that love is stronger than death.
Indeed. Okay, so having established that all the relationships are tangled here and there's tension here, if we go to the story that dominates this parsha, which is the story of finding the wife for Isaac, I want to say, so read the first verse with me and tell me what you think. Avraham zaken, baba yamin, v'Adonai berach et Avraham bakol. Abraham was old, advanced in days and years, and God blessed him with everything. So I want to say, no, sorry. How could you say that? God, his wife has passed away. He's 100 and something years old. He's got his tent. He's got his people. He's got his flocks. He's got lots of material wealth. But he doesn't, and he's got a beautiful reputation. People love him, but he has no continuity. You can't say he's blessed with everything. He's got, I don't want to say he's got nothing, but he's got no future at this moment. He's got a son that he doesn't talk to, Isaac. He's got a son that's estranged from him, Ishmael. He's got a wife who's gone. He's got a concubine who's gone. What has he got? He has a servant.
He has a faithful servant.
Exactly. So what's the purpose of saying that he's blessed?
I think that, pastorally, we would say that even after death, one can feel blessed. And that's an important thing to remember when we try to reconstruct our lives after the loss of a loved one. Because the initial reaction is I will never smile again. Laughter is gone.
I think it functions on a literary basis, like a folktale, which is once upon a time, everything was great, except there's a problem here. And so I think it's setting up the tension with this this real problem, this vacuum in his life. And then that's exactly what he goes and he turns in the very next verse, he turns to his servant and he says, Sim na yadcha tachit yerechi. Place your hand under my
Which
thigh.
is literary English grammar, so you could get.
Place your hand under my thigh. We're going to make a deal here, okay? And he says, go back. Why? Why can't Isaac marry a Canaanite? Why can't why do I have to go back there for? And what's the deal here? And so help me out.
Among the things I would observe about this, which I can do this in a number of things, but we sort of know this as a fact. Oh, the Bible is a polygamous society, and we know that Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines, and Abraham had a wife and a concubine. This fact, we say it's a polygamous society, but and David had a bunch of wives, and Solomon had a bunch of wives, and Solomon and David's children are identified by the mother of the children. Some of the king narratives in those obviously polygamous contexts are identified by the mother of, so and so was the king, he was the child of so and so, the woman. But almost all the important stories assume monogamy. They assume at a bare minimum 1 main wife, and you might you might assume that there are also some concubines around. Maybe you have a child maybe the man has a child with another woman, but it's incredibly important in these stories because there is effectively 1 wife. Everybody has 1 wife. At the end of the previous Parsha, by the way, with the birth of Rivka, we hear that Milcah has born to Nahor 8 children. We don't hear Nahor had 6 concubines and each of them had a child or 2. No, Milcah gave him 8 children. And it's very important clearly in the story of Abraham in his childless years that Sarah has to be the one to give him the child. And so just dialing down a little bit, dialing more closely to why does he have to go back? If it's such a polygamous society, Yitzhak's a rich guy, he's got a wealthy father, I'm sure we'll find a couple of Canaanites here, and then we'll find some Girgashites, and it's all going to be fine. Not okay. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that there's going to be a main wife, and the main wife has to be part of our clan, because Rivka is also going to be Abraham's great niece.
It points to an existential crisis in Abraham, because the question is, who am I? And what am I to become? And he's been living in the land now for 62 years, if we go from 75 to 137. And he doesn't quite belong to the land, even though God has promised it to him. And he has to be able to produce, which he did, admittedly not in great numbers, but he has to be able to produce again for the next generation. And he's not quite part of the land yet. His family is not quite part of the land.
So here I want to suggest to you that what he's doing here is he's trying to imprint onto Isaac the same pattern that he lived in, which is, I took a wife from there. I brought, basically, we understand Sarah to be a kind of relative of his, and he's saying, just like I took a relative as a wife, my son is going to take a relative as a wife, because I was supposed to produce a nation, and I only produced one son. So obviously, in my lifetime, the nation thing is not happening. So it's got to go to the next generation. So if the next generation is going to be entrusted with founding the nation, then he's got to do it like I did it. And let's get a woman from there, and let's repeat the pattern and see if it happens. And I'm going to move things, because God doesn't do this as in the sheet I'm writing for my Parsha sheet this week. It's like, we've watched too much Fiddler on the Roof, okay? And sing the song from Muttel and Seitel, wonder of wonder, miracle of miracle, God has given you to me. It's a miracle, right? That's the way it happens, but doesn't.
So I want to go in a different direction. The problem for Abraham is he's a transitional figure, and he's caught between family and ethnicity.
Okay.
The nation is going to be an ethnic group, but he's still at the family stage. And that's why the family is so important. We were talking before the show, you noted that Yaakov had 12 sons and they all married locals because there was a large enough number where they could assimilate.
Yeah.
But with one, you can't, because if you marry the local, you become the local.
I think that that's certainly, at play here. There's a lot of pressure here, but there's so many vectors that are going into this decision. One of them is certainly the threat of assimilation, the threat of that culture, but the other is like, I want you to be like me, boy.
So, we were talking earlier about the last chapter in Sefer Yehoshua, where reference is made to the God of Nahor, and it's striking that Abraham doesn't quite divorce himself from his brother's family, right? The Israelites have to, right? They have to choose between the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, but Abraham himself can't make that decision.
So Jeremy, you quoted the end of the chapter 22 at the end of the Akedah from last week's Parsha, where you have this whole family of Nahor, and I think that plays a very, very significant role, because he hears this. Abraham finds out that his brother has gotten busy, okay, and his brother already has basically 12. 8 plus 4. There's a whole symbolic number there, and it's like, whoa, geez, my brother didn't say geez.
It would be too early for that.
Moshe Rabbeinu.
My brother has 12 descendants, and what do I got? I got a son. I got one son that doesn't even call. Okay.
And by the way, my brother lives in a big, very successful Mesopotamian city. There's no comparison in terms of the apparent affluence, although Abraham has done fine. At some level, the pshat of Vadonai Berachet Abraham Bakol means, man, this guy's got a lot of sheep. He's got some serious number of goats.
Okay, so but again, it underscores what he's got and what he doesn't have. Another fiddler of, now I have everything. I have everything. No, you don't have everything. Sorry, you're missing the one basic thing, which is a future. You don't have a future without a married child. I mean, we observe that in the reality of people's lives now. And that's talk about pain. That's pain, right?
It's so striking, Elliot, the way you present this, because Isaac brings Rivka into his mother's tent.
Yes.
And immediately after that has all been resolved, Abraham goes and finds a wife for himself.
Isn't that great? Because what is he saying there? He's saying there, I'm done. I'm done with all these promises that God is going to do this for me. I'm going to get up and do it on my own. And he's 140 years old when he gets busy. And he populates half the Mediterranean, half the continent with his bride. I mean, because it's at that point that the promise of Hamon Goyim actually takes hold. And so when I look back at Abraham's life, and of course this Parsha, makes us look back at Abraham's life, it's a life that's filled with challenges, filled with devotion, filled with adherence to God, and filled with tremendous frustration, tremendous pain, tremendous anguish, and the tremendous sense of, I am going to make my own destiny. That's what he's doing here in the story. He's setting up the servant Eliezer, or whoever he is, to do that. Take matters into your own hand. Take the bull by the horns. Take your own destiny and make it happen. And we don't have time, obviously, to read through the whole story. But I think,
the bit about the end. So Isaac gets Rebecca, and the destiny is now shifted to his story. That's fine. Abraham goes and he marries somebody else.
Keturah.
Midrashically, Keturah is midrashically, she's known to be Hagar, and he has all these other children. But if we could just transpose this into a modern story, it's like, okay, Sarah dies, and Abe, moves to Florida, and he meets somebody else, and he's got a whole new family, and it's got to be massively awkward. But then there's a great line in 25.
Sure.
He's got all these children: Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midyan, Ishbak, Shua, Yokshan, Javad, Dedan, blah, 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 all these children. And it says, Veiten Abraham et kol asher lo li Yitzchak.
Yeah.
And Abraham leaves everything he has to Isaac. Ulivnei pilagshim asher Abraham natan Abraham matanot.
Isn't that
But
great?
Abraham to the concubine family, he gives gifts, and this has just got to be the most. This on a human level, this is like incredibly complicated. I'm giving you Yitzhak, you are my true destiny. I'm giving you everything, and you nice children know that Daddy would like you to have a bicycle.
Book.
You know what?
You get a book.
You get a book.
You get a camel.
Here for your
Maybe you
birthday,
do get a camel.
You get a book. I give you a talus. Give you a Kiddush cup.
But
Right.
but the assignment of that Abraham gives at Kol Asher Lo Yitzchak, he gives everything he's got to Isaac. That's the real story. Unfortunately, like none of us would want to live in a world where our most notable ancestors, treat their biological but not emotional children so cavalierly. I think it's kind of yucky, to say the least. But I do think that the point of the Torah is that the covenantal destiny, ki b'Yitzchak yikareh lachazara, this is your real child. The other children are physically your children, but your real child is Yitzchak, and that's how the covenantal story is told.
And the reason why Isaac is the real child is because Sarah is his only
the real
wife.
mother.
Is the real
exactly
mother.
right.
And the only wife.
And the only
only
wife.
true wife.
So despite what happens at the end of the parsha, go back to the hesped. The eulogy is, look, I started my life with you. I made my life with you. It went in all sorts of directions, but that changed all of humanity. Well, that's a big note to end on. But we got to end because we're at 36 minutes and 22 seconds here. But in the meantime, share this with everybody. We want to make it up to 120 people already. We got a lot of views.
Kol hanefesh asher asinu b'charan. They're all going to be listening to this.
We're so glad you joined us. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
See you next week on another edition of Parsha Talk. Bye.